The American pulled me into the airport bathroom. Airports are places of transit. People coming and going, crossing paths for mere seconds before disappearing forever. But that day, in that crowded terminal, something happened. Something I could have never predicted. I was just waiting for my flight when our eyes met. A split second. Maybe less than that. But it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. He was American. I could tell by the confident way he moved, the perfectly tailored suit on his athletic frame, the sharp, calculating gaze that scanned everything around him. But when his eyes locked on mine, a strange chill ran down my spine, as if, in that very moment, I had become his target. He walked toward me, slow and deliberate, like a man who already knew he wouldn't be refused. And I followed, not knowing why. Just moving, drawn to something I couldn't explain. Before I even realized what was happening, we were there. Inside the airport bathroom. Door locked. Silence, except for the muffled sounds of footsteps outside. The air between us was thick. My breath was short. And his eyes, dark, unreadable, were locked on me, as if he knew exactly what was coming next. And now? What does he want? What do I want? If you think you know where this story is going, think again. I could still hear the low hum of the terminal outside, the rolling suitcases, the distant voices muffled by the closed door. But inside this cramped airport bathroom, everything felt different. He stood in front of me, just a few inches away, his broad frame blocking most of the dim overhead light. His eyes, sharp and piercing, were locked onto mine. It was the kind of gaze that held weight, the kind that made you feel seen in a way that was both intoxicating and terrifying. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. He raised a finger, silencing me before I could even form a thought. I saw you watching me, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I felt my pulse quicken. Had I been that obvious? I thought I had just stolen a glance, maybe two, but something about him had pulled my attention, like gravity, like a force I couldn't resist. You don't even know my name, I managed to say, my voice unsteady. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Does it matter? I should have walked out, should have turned around, unlocked the door, and gone back to the gate where my flight was probably boarding soon. But my feet didn't move. Neither did his. I don't do this, I said, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. His head tilted slightly, as if he was studying me. Neither do I. Then why were we here? Why did his presence feel so overpowering, like the air itself had thickened, making it hard to breathe? A flicker of hesitation crossed his face for the briefest moment. Then, as if making a decision he couldn't take back, he reached past me and pressed his hand flat against the door, blocking the only way out. I should have been afraid. But I wasn't. I was wired, my body tense with something I couldn't name. The thrill of the unknown? The danger of the situation? The fact that my heart was pounding so hard, I was sure he could hear it? His breath was steady, controlled. Last chance, he said. Walk out, and this never happened. I didn't move. A slow, satisfied exhale left his lips. I thought so. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick, suffocating. And then, just as I was about to say something, to break the tension, to demand an explanation, to ask him what the hell we were doing, there was a sudden knock on the door, a voice outside. Someone was waiting to get in. I froze. His eyes darkened. Shit, I whispered. His lips twitched, amused by my reaction. Stay quiet. Another knock, more impatient this time. We weren't alone anymore, and this had just gotten a lot more complicated. The knocking grew louder, 3 sharp raps against the door. Someone on the other side was impatient. I held my breath, my body tense, but the American in front of me didn't flinch. If anything, he looked almost entertained. His lips curved into a smirk, his hand still pressed firmly against the door, blocking any escape. Whoever was outside cleared their throat. "Occupied," the American said smoothly, his voice calm, composed, completely unaffected by the situation. A pause, then the sound of footsteps moving away. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain from my shoulders. "That was close?" he interrupted. "Exciting?" I shot him a look. "Stupid." His smirk widened. "And yet, you're still here." I hated that he was right. I should have left the second the knock came. Hell, I should have never followed him in the first place. But something about him, his confidence, his intensity, the way he looked at me like he already knew all my answers before I even spoke, kept me rooted to the spot. I shifted against the door, suddenly feeling the heat of the moment settle deep in my chest. "Who are you?" I asked. For the first time, a flicker of hesitation crossed his features, as if he was debating whether to answer. Then, finally, he said, "Call me Logan." It sounded too casual, too easy, like it wasn't even his real name, but I didn't question it. "And you?" he asked, tilting his head slightly, his eyes locked on mine. I hesitated, but there was no point in lying. "Ethan?" "Ethan." He repeated my name slowly, almost like he was testing how it felt on his tongue. There was something about the way he said it that made my stomach tighten. I swallowed hard. "Why did you bring me in here?" Logan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned in slightly, just enough that I caught a whiff of his scent. Something clean, expensive, laced with the faintest hint of spice. It was intoxicating. "I think you already know," he said finally, his voice lower now, quieter. I should have looked away, should have pushed past him and walked out of there like nothing had happened. But my body didn't get the message. I was still standing there, still meeting his gaze, still feeling the electric charge of the space between us. This was insane. This was reckless. This was... Another knock. This time it was sharper, more insistent. Logan let out a slow breath, then took a step back, giving me just enough room to move if I wanted to. "Your call, Ethan." I stared at him, my pulse hammering against my ribs. There were 2 choices. Walk out and pretend this moment never happened, or stay, and step into something I didn't fully understand. The handle of the door rattled. Someone was trying to push it open. Logan raised an eyebrow, waiting for my decision. I took a shaky breath and reached for the lock. My fingers hovered over the lock, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Logan didn't move. He was watching me, waiting, his expression unreadable. Outside, the handle rattled again, followed by an impatient sigh. I could still leave. I could unlock the door, walk out, and pretend none of this had ever happened. But that would mean pretending I wasn't drawn to him, pretending I didn't feel the pull, the rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins like fire. I took a breath and turned the lock. The sound was quiet, but Logan noticed. His lips twitched slightly, amusement flickering in his sharp blue eyes. "Interesting choice." "Shut up," I muttered. Another knock, harder this time. "Come on, man. Some of us actually need to use the bathroom." The voice was irritated, clearly someone who had no idea what kind of moment they were interrupting. Logan chuckled softly. "Impatient, aren't they?" "This is insane," I whispered. "Maybe." He shrugged, unfazed. "But that didn't stop you from locking the door again, did it?" I hated that he had a point. A few seconds passed, then whoever was outside let out a frustrated huff and walked away. The sound of footsteps fading into the distance sent a strange mix of relief and anticipation flooding through me. Logan leaned in, just slightly. Now, where were we? I swallowed hard. The air between us was thick, charged with something I didn't know how to name. I had never done anything like this before. Following a stranger into a locked bathroom, letting myself get pulled into a situation that felt so completely out of my control. And yet, I wasn't running. You like control, don't you? Logan mused, tilting his head slightly. I frowned. What? He smirked, stepping closer. I can tell. You overthink everything, probably used to being the one who calls the shots. I hated how accurate that was. He took another step forward, and instinctively I moved back. My spine met the cold tile of the wall, but Logan didn't stop. He wasn't touching me, not yet, but he was close. Close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him, close enough that I had to tilt my head slightly to keep meeting his eyes. You're overthinking again, he murmured. I exhaled sharply, trying to ignore the way my pulse was racing. And you're way too confident. His grin widened. That's not a denial. I opened my mouth to respond, but then the airport intercom crackled to life. Final boarding call for Flight 278 to Los Angeles. All remaining passengers, please proceed to Gate 16 immediately. Shit. My flight. Reality crashed down like ice water over my skin. I had been so wrapped up in this moment, in Logan, that I had completely lost track of time. He must have seen the shift in my expression because his smirk softened, just slightly. That's your flight? I nodded, still trying to process everything. For the first time since we'd stepped into this bathroom, Logan took a step back. The space between us stretched, and the sudden loss of proximity sent an unexpected pang through my chest. I should go. I needed to go. But I didn't move. His gaze flickered down to my hands, clenched at my sides, then back to my face. You don't have to leave just yet. I let out a shaky laugh. Yeah? And what do you suggest? Miss my flight and stay locked in an airport bathroom with a guy I just met? He shrugged. Could be worse ways to spend an afternoon. I rolled my eyes. You're impossible. But I wasn't angry. If anything, I was frustrated. With him, with myself, with the fact that I wanted to stay when I knew I couldn't. Logan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling through his nose. Okay. Tell you what. Give me your number. I blinked. What? Your number, he repeated. You don't have to decide anything right now. But if you change your mind, if you ever feel like seeing where this could go, you'll know how to reach me. I hesitated. This was insane. All of it. But the idea of walking away and never knowing what this was or what it could be, felt even worse. Slowly, I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers unsteady as I typed my number into his contacts. When I handed it back, he glanced at the screen, then locked eyes with me again. Safe flight, Ethan. I barely had time to process hearing my name from his lips before he was already reaching past me, unlocking the door. And then, just like that, he was gone. I stood there for a few more seconds, my heart still pounding. Then, finally, I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked out. But something told me this wasn't the last time I'd see Logan. The moment I walked out of the bathroom, everything around me felt different. The fluorescent lights of the terminal were too bright, the chatter of travelers too loud, the hurried footsteps too fast. My mind was still trapped back there, in that dimly lit space, in that charged moment with Logan. His name echoed in my head, as if it had already carved itself into my thoughts. The phone in my pocket felt heavier than it should. He had my number now. That alone sent another wave of adrenaline through me. I kept walking, my pace quickening as I weaved through the crowded terminal. My flight was boarding. I had spent too much time in there, too much time with him. But even as I rushed toward my gate, my body was moving on autopilot, and my mind was stuck replaying every single second of what had just happened. I had never done something like that before, never been so impulsive, so reckless. And yet, I hadn't regretted it, not one bit. The airport intercom blared again, calling for final boarding on my flight to Los Angeles. I picked up my pace, barely making it to gate 16 before the attendant was about to close the doors. She smiled politely as she scanned my ticket, unaware of the chaos storming inside me. I muttered a quick thanks and hurried down the jet bridge, stepping onto the plane just as the final passengers were settling into their seats. As soon as I sat down, I exhaled sharply. The cabin around me was quiet, a contrast to the rush of the terminal. Buckling my seatbelt, I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. Would he text me? Or was this already over? A fleeting encounter. Nothing more. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. You always cut it that close. Or was it just an excuse to stay longer? My lips twitched before I could stop them. So he wasn't done with this either. I typed back. Maybe I just wanted to see if you'd text first. His response came almost instantly. Clever. I like that. I hesitated before replying again. So, was this just a one-time airport thing, or? Before I could finish typing, another message popped up. Logan. I don't do one-time things, Ethan. If I want something, I go after it. I swallowed hard. The word sent a thrill through me, one I wasn't ready to admit. I was still staring at my screen when the flight attendant's voice crackled over the speakers, announcing that we were preparing for takeoff. I switched my phone to airplane mode, but Logan's last message burned in my mind. If I want something, I go after it. Outside the window, the city lights shrank beneath us as the plane ascended into the night sky. 4 days passed. I had told myself I wouldn't think about him, that this was nothing, a random encounter, an impulsive decision, something to forget. I had failed miserably. Logan had been in my head ever since. We had exchanged a few texts here and there, nothing too deep, just teasing messages that felt like a game neither of us wanted to end. But I still didn't know what this was. Was he just playing? Was I? I wasn't sure what answer I wanted. My phone buzzed again. Logan. Are you free tonight? I stared at the message. My pulse jumped. I hesitated before replying. Depends. Why? Logan. Because I'm in LA. I sat up straighter. What? Logan. Got here this morning. Business trip. Thought I'd see if you were as impulsive in your city as you were in an airport bathroom. I exhaled sharply, my fingers tightening around my phone. He was here. He was in my city. I could say no. I could pretend like this had just been an airport moment, something left behind in another time zone. But the truth was, I didn't want to. I texted back. Where are you? Logan. Downtown. The Tower Hotel. Room 1208. I stared at the message, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could turn off my phone and forget this ever happened. But instead, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. I drove through the city with my hands tight around the steering wheel, my mind a mess of anticipation and hesitation. The streets of Los Angeles stretched ahead of me, neon lights flickering in the distance, the hum of the city alive even at this hour. Every red light felt like an eternity, every second giving me more time to think, to second guess. But I didn't turn around. I didn't stop. The Tower Hotel loomed ahead, sleek and modern, its glass exterior reflecting the traffic below. I pulled into the valet, barely registering the attendant as he took my keys and handed me a small ticket. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, the cool air conditioning hitting me like a wake-up call. The lobby was quiet, polished marble floors gleaming under the dim golden lights. A few people lingered by the bar, but my focus was straight ahead. The elevator. I pressed the button, waiting as the numbers blinked down. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I already knew who it was. "Logan, are you coming up or should I come get you?" I exhaled slowly before responding. Already here. The elevator doors slid open. I stepped inside, alone, watching as the doors closed in front of me. My reflection stared back at me in the mirror-like walls, eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Was it excitement? Anxiety? A mix of both? The numbers climbed. 10, 11, 12. The doors parted with a soft chime. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps quiet on the plush carpet. Room 1208 was at the end of the corridor, the gold numbers glinting under the dim lights. I stopped in front of the door, my pulse a steady drum in my ears. I raised my hand to knock, but before I could, the door swung open. Logan stood there, leaning against the door frame like he had all the time in the world. He was dressed casually, dark jeans, a fitted black shirt, but there was nothing casual about the way he looked at me. "You came," he said, a knowing smirk playing at his lips. I let out a shaky breath. "Yeah." His eyes swept over me like he was assessing something, deciding something. Then he stepped aside, motioning me in. I hesitated for half a second before stepping over the threshold. The door clicked shut behind me. The suite was dimly lit, the glow from the city outside casting shadows against the walls. A bottle of whiskey sat on the table, 2 glasses beside it. Logan walked past me, his presence filling the room effortlessly. "Drink?" he asked, picking up the bottle. I shook my head. "I'm good." He nodded, pouring himself a glass but not drinking it immediately. Instead, he turned to face me, leaning back against the table. "So, tell me, why did you come?" I swallowed. "You asked." His lips twitched. "And you always do what people ask?" "No." He tilted his head slightly. "Then why me?" I opened my mouth, but no answer came out. How could I explain something I didn't fully understand myself? There was just something about him. A pull. An intensity I couldn't ignore. Logan pushed off the table, closing the distance between us with slow, deliberate steps. "You overthink everything," he murmured. I stiffened. "And you don't think at all?" He let out a low chuckle. "Oh, I just don't waste time second-guessing." I exhaled sharply. "Must be nice." He studied me for a moment, then said, "It is. But you don't have to overthink right now." His voice was lower now, quieter. The space between us was almost non-existent. I could feel the heat radiating off him, the air charged with something unspoken. And then, before I could even process what was happening, he reached out, slow, deliberate, and brushed his fingers against mine. A simple touch. Barely anything. But it sent a shockwave through me, like my entire body had just woken up. I looked up at him, my breath caught in my throat. "You can leave if you want," he murmured. "I won't stop you." I didn't move. His eyes darkened slightly, as if he had just gotten his answer without me needing to say a word. And just like that, everything changed. The moment his fingers touched mine, something in me snapped. It wasn't just attraction, it was something deeper, something that had been building since the moment we locked eyes at the airport. Logan didn't rush. He never did. He just watched me, waiting, letting me decide. I could still walk away. I could still stop this. But I didn't. His hand slid up, slow, deliberate, until his fingers rested against my jaw. He tilted my chin up slightly, forcing me to meet his gaze. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes said everything. I barely had time to take a breath before his lips brushed against mine. Not demanding, not forceful, just enough to test, to see if I would pull away. I didn't. The air between us disappeared. The tension that had been suffocating us for days broke like a dam, flooding every inch of space with something electric, something undeniable. His grip tightened slightly, his other hand pressing against my lower back, pulling me closer. I felt everything, his warmth, his strength, the steady rhythm of his breath against my skin. And just as quickly as it started, he pulled back, just enough to look at me. His thumb traced my jaw, slow, lazy, like he was memorizing me. "Still overthinking?" he murmured. I exhaled, shaky. "Not anymore." He smirked. "Good." There was no more hesitation after that. Morning light filtered through the curtains, painting the hotel suite in soft gold. My eyes opened slowly, my body still heavy with sleep, warmth pressing against my back. For a moment I forgot where I was, and then I felt the steady rise and fall of someone breathing beside me. Logan. The weight of the night before settled over me like a slow tide. The tension, the fire, the way everything had felt inevitable. His arm was draped over my waist, his body still half asleep, but his grip was firm, like he wasn't ready to let go. I should have been panicking. I should have been thinking about what this meant, about what came next. But for once, I didn't. I turned slightly, just enough to watch him. He looked different in the morning light, softer, less guarded. His lips parted slightly, his breathing deep and steady. For a second, I let myself forget reality, forget that I had a life outside this hotel room, that Logan was still a stranger in so many ways. But then, as if sensing my thoughts, his eyes opened. He didn't speak, neither did I. We just stared, time stretching between us, full of things we weren't ready to say. And then, finally, he smirked. "Told you I don't do one-time things." I let out a breathless laugh, shaking my head. "You're impossible." His fingers traced lazy patterns against my skin. "And yet, you're still here." I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because he was right, and that terrified me.